Om Tat Sat Divine Self. Welcome to Gyan Bhakti channel from Swami Nikhilananda. My humble prostrations to the all-pervading Brahman, to my worshipful Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayanandaji Maharaj, to Ram Parivar and all sages and saints, and to each of you divine soul watching today's satsang. So we are currently studying Mysticism of the Ramayana, commentaries by my worshipful Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayanandaji Maharaj, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So let's get started. We are currently studying the history of Saint Tulsidas, who had composed the Ramayana, the Hindi form of Ramayana, which became very popular in all over India and many parts of the world also. So Tulsidas had studied the Valmiki Ramayana and other Ramayanas of his time and various other stories. So the spiritual experience became the basis of Tulsidas's wondrous inspiration then to write Ramayana. Once he knew Lord Rama had applied sandal paste on him, that he was truly a blessed soul. He became an enlightened sage on the path of devotion and commenced writing the Ramayana at about year 1595 on Ram Nami Day, a day that is celebrated as Lord Rama's birthday. So that's a very auspicious time. It took him almost 3 years to finish the Ramayana, and he poured his heart out, and it is done in such beautiful literary prose that it delights even the hardest of the hearts, and we all melt in that scripture. Tulsidas has studied the Valmiki Ramayana, and then he and many others from Valmiki ji. Remember, Valmiki ji was the first person who wrote the Ramayana in Sanskrit. So he thus had a fullness of devotion and an ecstatic experience of communion with Rama. So overpowered by the desire to serve humanity, Tulsidas ji vowed to give the essence of the scriptures, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Puranas, to people through the story of Rama. So this is what sages and saints do. They create they take deep mysteries that are very complex and very hard for a common person to read, such as the Vedas or the Upanishads. But then they condense it into beautiful, loving stories where all we need is devotion and bhakti and an ear that longs to hear those things and get all that knowledge, all that difficult knowledge through a story form, and then enjoy that and also evolve along the way. So this is how he decided to reach the people through Ramayana. According to a popular story, Tulsidas ji first intended to present the Ramayana in the most scholarly manner. So he commenced writing the Ramayana in classical Sanskrit. Early in the morning, he would compose his introductory verses, but then every night rats came and ate up what he had written. Of course, Tulsidas ji became very upset, but there was nothing he could do about this puzzling situation. So this is the divine plan. When things don't go according to the way you expect, when we are facing adversity, we should remember there is a divine plan behind that. There is a reason, we just don't know yet why. So this strange pattern continued for a few days until one night Tulsidas ji received in dream a message from Lord Hanuman saying, "O Tulsidas, why are you writing the Ramayana in the scholarly Sanskrit language? The Ramayana should reach everyone. It should not be confined only to a few learned scholars." Look at the compassion of God, Lord Hanuman, all these divine energies. Each of us is entitled to mukti, liberation, but we don't know. We sometimes say, well, I can't do it, or I'm not educated enough. God has cut all those barriers for us. He's made the process so simple. So Sanskrit language was not needed for that time. The Ramayana should reach everyone. It should not be confined to a few learned scholars. Therefore, Ganesha's vehicle, the rat, will not let you complete the Ramayana. See, Ganesha's vehicle, the rat, was eating the papers written by Tulsidas ji. and he said, don't be discouraged. Start writing the Ramayana so that the majority of people will be benefited by it. So it was divine grace that guided Tulsidas ji to follow the simpler process. So Tulsidas ji then started writing this in Avadhi, and the rats stopped eating up his work. After Tulsidas, which means it got blessed by Lord Ganesha and all the energies. After Tulsidas had completed the Ramayana, however, he had another difficulty. The moment he brought the Ramayana before the Pandits and scholars of the time, their jealousy arose towards him, which is a common problem. We may be highly educated, we may be big Pandits, but if we are jealous and if we think somebody else is greater, then we are not so erudite scholars as we think we are, because jealousy itself is a vice, and if that exists, how can we be called people of God? How can we be called true disciples and walking on the holy path? So that's what happened at the time. These are highly intellectual Pandits who became very jealous because they wanted control, they wanted the power, and Sanskrit was the way to show their knowledge. So they started denouncing this great work, saying that it should have been written in the divine language of Sanskrit. Any scripture that promises to lead a person beyond the world of birth and death has to be in Sanskrit, not in Avadi or Hindi, they said. Further, they began to find many defects in Tulsidas's interpretation of the scriptures, and they said he should actually destroy the Ramayana that he had composed with so much dedication and love. So imagine how God tests our will and strength. It is not a simple process. We have to be prepared to go through the examination also before we graduate. When the controversy became too difficult to resolve, these renowned scholars presented the Ramayana before another great personality of that time. His name was Madhusudan Saraswati. It was their hope the Madhusudan Saraswati would denounce the work and then it would be easily destroyed. But when Madhusudan Saraswati read the Ramayana, he became so thrilled and he described his sentiments in a sublime verse. He said, there is a creeper growing in this garden of bliss, and that creeper is Saint Tulsidas, and every blossom of the creeper speaks the glory of Lord Rama. In other words, Madhusudan Saraswati was extremely impressed, as according to God's plan. The Sanskrit scholars were not very pleased with this, and ultimately they forced Tulsidas to submit his composition to a test. They placed many scriptures in a pile with Tulsidas's Ramayana at the bottom of the pile. Then they prayed to Lord Shiva, the deity of the temple, to decide which scripture was the best. So imagine how many tests sages and saints have to go through with average people or so-called learned folk. If Tulsidas ji was worthwhile, they asserted, it would be found higher in the pile when morning came. And they placed big locks. Early in the morning, when they opened the door of the temple, they found Tulsidas's composition right on the top of the pile with a divine message upon it, which said, Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So Lord Shiva, who is immersed in Samadhi, himself blessed that auspicious scripture, which means Satyam, truth, Shivam, auspiciousness, Sundaram, beauty. That is the best. Whatever may be the historicity behind this popular story, it does point to the fact that Ramayana was initially opposed with great furor. However, despite that opposition, the work has become one of the most popular and inspiring compositions ever to delight the human hearts. With this, we conclude our satsanga for today, and we will see you tomorrow. This is Swami Nikhilananda. Om Tat Sat.